Welcome back, guys, to MysteryCon. On this channel, I narrate conspiracy theories to help you sleep and relax. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe, and also share this video with your friends and family to help them fall asleep too. Please let me know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. Now sit back, relax, and let's begin.
I always knew something wasn't quite right with the world. Maybe it was the way things never seemed to add up, the constant feeling that history was just a string of events that had been carefully curated, as if someone was pulling the strings from behind the scenes. I never voiced those thoughts out loud, though. Who would listen? People are too busy with their lives to care about the unseen forces shaping ours. But that was before I found the file. I wasn't looking for it, not really. It was one of those days where everything was just off. I'd been working late at my government job, buried in paperwork, trying to make sense of a routine case when the lights flickered. The building had this old, eerie vibe to it, a place where time seemed to stand still, the walls holding secrets they had no intention of revealing. It was just after midnight, and the office was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights and the soft clatter of my keyboard as I typed away. Then, my computer screen blinked, a strange distortion, like someone had messed with the pixels for just a second. I froze, staring at the screen, expecting an explanation that never came. But the weirdness didn't end there. I got up to stretch, my eyes scanning the room, when something caught my eye, a folder tucked away behind a stack of reports. It wasn't labeled like the others. It stood out, daring me to open it. I pulled it out of the pile. The folder was thick, its pages heavy with the weight of whatever it was hiding. No one had told me about it, and I knew this was beyond my usual scope of work. Curiosity got the best of me, as it always does, and I flipped it open. The first thing I saw was a series of photographs, yellowed with age, documenting world events, battles, protests, political upheavals. But it wasn't just that. There were dates scrawled on the backs of each one, some that didn't quite match up. Like the Civil Rights March in the United States, except the date was wrong. Way wrong. And there were references to historical events I couldn't place, timelines that didn't match up with my understanding of history. And then I found it, a document with only 2 words: time manipulation. It was a theory, written in what seemed to be the rushed hand of someone in a panic, as if they were trying to get this information out before it was too late. As I read, my heart pounded in my chest. It spoke of an ancient secret society, the Time Lords, who had mastered a technology capable of manipulating time itself. According to this document, these elites had altered history to secure their own control, making sure the events that shaped the world were always in their favor. I couldn't believe it. It sounded like something from a science fiction novel, not something real. But the more I read, the more everything started to make sense. The document explained how certain key historical events, wars, political shifts, economic crashes, had been manipulated to fit the agenda of a few powerful individuals. And then, the most chilling part, the society had been operating for centuries, secretly controlling the course of human events to ensure their dominance. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the implications of what I was reading set in. This wasn't just some conspiracy theory, this was real. There was proof, buried right here in front of me. The elites had been controlling history, and time, for as long as humanity could remember. I glanced around the room, feeling like someone was watching me. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fit too perfectly. The world had always felt manipulated, but I never thought I'd find evidence of it. I slammed the folder shut and shoved it back into the pile, but it was too late. The seed had been planted. I couldn't unsee what I had just read. I had to know more. I had to find out the truth, even if it meant risking everything. As I sat there in the dimly lit room, I realized that I had just stumbled upon something much bigger than me. Something that, if exposed, could change everything we thought we knew about the world. And now, there was no going back. The investigation had begun. The next few days after I stumbled upon that folder were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, my mind constantly drifting back to the document I'd found. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words. Time manipulation. I kept replaying the details in my head, how the elites had managed to control time, to bend it to their will, to rewrite the very fabric of history. I had to know more. But how? I wasn't sure where to begin, who to trust, or even if I could go through with it. After all, whoever controlled time had unimaginable power. If this secret society, the Time Lords, really existed, they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And yet there was this nagging feeling deep down, if I didn't do something, if I didn't try to unravel the mystery, I'd be complicit in the lie. So I started small. I combed through every old document, every file I could get my hands on. The company I worked for, a government contractor, was involved in sensitive projects that never seemed to make it to the public eye. I dug through the archives, looking for anything that hinted at the kinds of technologies described in the document. At first, it seemed like a wild goose chase. I found nothing that directly tied to time manipulation, but I did find something else, an old research project from the 1960s. The project was labeled Chronotech, Advancing Temporal Research. I stared at the title for what seemed like forever. I had never heard of this before. The research was heavily redacted, but the document mentioned experimental methods of controlling time perception and temporal anomalies. I didn't need to read any more to know I was onto something significant. I couldn't believe it. The project had been classified and buried for decades, but here it was, staring me in the face. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was the first real clue I'd found. The connections between the society and their manipulation of time were all there, hidden in plain sight, just waiting to be uncovered. I spent the next few days trying to track down more information, but it wasn't easy. Every time I thought I was getting closer, the trail went cold. I started to feel like I was being watched. My emails were flagged, my phone calls intercepted, and my computer seemed to glitch at the most inconvenient times. I had become a target. Whoever was behind this didn't want anyone digging into their past. Then, the breakthrough came when I met Adam, a former colleague who had worked on the Chronotech project. He was older now, his hair graying at the temples, and he had long since left the government sector. But he still had contacts in the field, and when I mentioned the project's name, his face went pale. He didn't say much, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Get out of this, now," he warned me, his voice low and shaky. "If they know you're asking about this, they'll come after you. Trust me, I've seen it happen." I was taken aback. Who was they? And why was Adam so terrified? He didn't give me much more than that, just a cryptic warning before he disappeared, as if he knew the price of getting too close to the truth. But his words lingered in my mind, gnawing at me. I was getting too close, I could feel it. Whatever the Time Lords were hiding, it was bigger than anything I could have imagined. I had my first real clue, and it was leading me somewhere dark, somewhere dangerous. But I couldn't turn back. Not now. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I had to know how far the rabbit hole went. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I was a part of this. Whether I liked it or not, I had crossed the line, and there was no going back. I was about to learn just how far the manipulation went, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. The deeper I went, the more I realized just how dangerous this investigation had become. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, watched from the shadows. At first, I thought it was paranoia, a side effect of uncovering a conspiracy of this magnitude. But as time went on, I couldn't ignore the signs. Strange cars parked outside my building. Disguised calls on my phone. A tap on my shoulder when I turned a corner, but no one was there. And then, I received the letter. It slipped under my door one night, no return address, just a plain envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "You're not the only one looking." I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Whoever had sent this knew exactly what I was doing. They were watching me. And they were warning me. But the message was clear. I wasn't alone in this fight. There were others, like me, who had uncovered the secret. And I needed to find them before it was too late. The next morning, I started digging again, but this time, I wasn't looking for the elites. I was looking for anyone who might have knowledge of a group that could oppose them. I couldn't do this alone. Whoever had sent the letter had given me a glimmer of hope, a sliver of a chance to fight back. I didn't have to look long before I found a lead, a name that kept coming up in the most obscure places. The Timekeepers. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that this was no ordinary resistance group. The Timekeepers were an underground faction dedicated to stopping the manipulation of time. They operated in complete secrecy, using the same advanced technology that the Time Lords had mastered, but for the opposite purpose. They were the ones who had tried to undo the changes made to history by the Time Lords. They were the ones who wanted to set things right, to return control of time to the people, not a powerful few. I knew I had to find them. They were my only chance of not only surviving but of exposing the truth. But finding them wouldn't be easy. They were a ghost organization, their members scattered, working in the shadows, careful to remain undetected by the Time Lords. My search led me to an old friend, Maria. She had been an intelligence analyst years ago before disappearing off the grid. She had been one of the best at finding things that were buried deep, and she had a knack for connecting the dots that others couldn't see. When I reached out, she was reluctant to get involved. She had gone into hiding for a reason. But I was persistent. After a few tense conversations, she agreed to meet me. The place she chose was a small, unassuming cafe in a rundown part of town, far from the eyes of anyone who might be watching. When I saw her, I couldn't help but notice how much she had changed. She was thinner, her eyes sharper, constantly scanning the room as if she was expecting someone to walk in and drag her away at any moment. "You've uncovered the truth, haven't you?" she asked, as soon as we sat down. I nodded. "I have. The Time Lords are real. And they've been manipulating history for centuries. But I'm not sure what to do with this information. I need your help." Maria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out a small, worn-out notebook from her bag. Flipping through it, she stopped at a page near the back and slid it across the table to me. It was a list of names, dates, and locations, places that had witnessed strange events, historical shifts, and unexplained anomalies. "These are the Timekeepers," she said quietly. "They've been fighting back for years. But they've been hunted. You'll never find them through conventional methods. They've learned how to hide, how to make themselves invisible. But they're out there." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wasn't just fighting a global conspiracy anymore. I was now up against an organization that had been in hiding for decades, just as determined to protect the truth as the Time Lords were to bury it. Maria looked at me, her face grave. "If you're serious about taking them down, you'll need to join them. But be careful. There's a price to pay for crossing the Time Lords. They'll stop at nothing to erase anyone who threatens their power." I left the cafe feeling both hopeful and terrified. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. My investigation had taken a sharp turn. I wasn't just trying to expose the truth anymore. I was in a race against time, facing forces that could manipulate the very essence of time itself. And now, I had no choice but to join the fight. I should have known things would only get more complicated from here. After meeting Maria, I felt like I was stepping into a world far darker and more dangerous than I could have imagined. The Timekeepers weren't just a resistance group. They were an underground network of people who had devoted their lives to uncovering and sabotaging the Time Lords' manipulation of time. They'd been quietly fighting back for years, but their struggle was beginning to feel like a losing battle. The Time Lords' influence was everywhere. They had eyes in every major government, in the media, in corporations. They were untouchable, it seemed. And yet, here I was, one step away from joining them, desperate to stop the world's most powerful elites from rewriting history. The problem was, I wasn't sure where to begin. I needed more information, more proof. The file I had found, though it gave me a glimpse into the grand conspiracy, was hardly enough. I needed to dig deeper. That's when Maria gave me a piece of advice that I couldn't ignore. The answers are in the past. The Time Lords hide their secrets in plain sight, woven into historical events. You'll have to find the anomalies, the moments that don't make sense. They're everywhere. I didn't understand what she meant at first, but I was too desperate to let it go. I started with the basics, anything related to time manipulation that had been recorded throughout history. At first, it seemed like a waste of time. I read through ancient manuscripts, historical archives, even obscure books that seemed unrelated. But the more I read, the clearer it became. There were anomalies, strange inconsistencies that had never been properly explained. I came across an event in 1947 that didn't fit. It was a small blip in the records, but it was big enough to raise suspicion. The partition of India and Pakistan, an event that was supposed to have been a spontaneous eruption of political conflict, had been manipulated. The circumstances surrounding the split were too perfect, too convenient. Could it have been staged? Could the elites have orchestrated it for their own gain? I had no solid proof, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I dug deeper into the political machinations of the time and found connections between powerful families, high-ranking officials, and financial institutions that I couldn't explain. My instincts told me to keep going, to follow this thread wherever it led, but the more I uncovered, the more I realized how deeply entangled the Time Lords were in the fabric of world history. They had their hands in everything, from wars to economic crashes to revolutions. The strange thing was, every time I uncovered something new, I found myself getting closer to the truth, but also more isolated. There were signs of tampering with documents I had found, like someone had already gotten to them before me. It was as though every clue I uncovered triggered a new attempt to stop me from finding the full picture. My office was broken into. Files went missing. Even my own computer was hacked, and I barely caught the intrusion in time to erase the data I'd been gathering. I was being silenced, and I knew it. One night, after a particularly unsettling encounter with someone who had been following me for days, I found a hidden diary, one that hadn't been in any archives. It was old, yellowed, but it was perfect. The writing was a confession. A man named Victor Graves, once a high-ranking member of the Time Lords, had left it behind, detailing the methods they had used to manipulate not just world events, but the very perception of time itself. The entries were chilling, recounting how they had orchestrated wars, assassinations, and financial crashes, all using a device that allowed them to shift time in subtle ways. The diary also contained a critical piece of information, a map with several key locations marked on it. These were places of historical significance, places where time anomalies had occurred. The locations weren't just random. They were points where history had been altered in some profound way. Some were famous battles. Some were political events that had shaped nations. But all were tied together by one thing. The Time Lords had been there, manipulating events from the shadows. My heart raced as I stared at the map. I had been following the wrong leads all along. This was the key. These locations were where I would find the answers. I just had to make it there before they found me. But there was a problem. I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay hidden. The more I uncovered, the more I became a target. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I wasn't just fighting a global conspiracy. I was fighting for my own survival. I knew I was getting closer, but every step I took into the heart of this conspiracy only deepened the sense of dread in my gut. It wasn't just the fear of what I might uncover, it was the constant, nagging suspicion that I was being manipulated, too. I had already started to question my own memories, but now, I felt like a pawn in a much larger game. The map, which had seemed like my lifeline just a few days ago, now felt like a trap. I didn't know who to trust, and I couldn't even trust my own instincts anymore. Each location marked on that map pointed to a significant event in history, events I had studied in school, heard about in documentaries, but never really questioned. Yet, the more I looked into them, the more I saw the same pattern, subtle changes, minute alterations in time, things that didn't quite fit. And then came the discovery that would change everything. I had followed the map to a small, obscure town in Eastern Europe, one that had barely registered in history books. It wasn't a place known for any major events, yet the map pointed to it with such certainty. The town's name was Renia. I couldn't understand why it was significant, but I felt compelled to investigate. There was something there that I needed to find. The town was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The streets were empty except for a few locals who looked at me with wary eyes. It felt like walking through a forgotten world. I spent the next few days scouring the town for any lead, but all I found were dead ends. No libraries with historical records. No local archives. Just empty streets and abandoned buildings. That was until I met Thomas. I had heard whispers of an old man living on the outskirts of town, someone who had seen it all and knew the town's secrets. They said he was a relic of the past, someone who had lived through the horrors of war and had never left, never moved on. Desperate, I tracked him down. Thomas wasn't much to look at, just an old man, hunched over, with a long white beard and eyes that seemed to see through everything. When I approached him, he didn't speak at first. He just stared at me, as if weighing the decision of whether or not to speak. After a long silence, he finally said, "You're here because of the events, aren't you? The ones they've erased." The words hit me like a shock to the system. I wasn't sure if he meant the events I'd been chasing, but I nodded, hoping he would continue. "I was there," he said. "I saw it. They came. They changed everything. They altered it, like they've done with so many other places." He paused, his voice thick with regret. "And now, no one remembers." He led me to a small, run-down building at the edge of the town, hidden behind overgrown vines and forgotten walls. Inside, the place was covered in dust, but there was a strange, almost sacred air to it. It looked like an old workshop, filled with machinery I didn't recognize. But it wasn't the machines that caught my attention. It was the large, metal object at the center of the room. It looked like a timepiece, but it wasn't. It was something far more complex, a device that seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't understand. It was a small, inconspicuous machine, yet it hummed with power. It had been hidden away for decades, its purpose unknown to most. But Thomas knew. "This," he whispered, "is what they used. The device that can manipulate time itself." The words hit me like a punch. This was it. The thing I had been searching for, the key to everything. The Time Lords had used this technology to control time, to manipulate history to their advantage. And now, I was holding it in my hands. Thomas explained that the device had been created in the early 1900s, during the rise of powerful secret societies. It had been used during key historical events to subtly alter the course of history, ensuring that the elite's grip on power remained unchallenged. The device had been stolen by the Time Lords, and they had used it for decades to rewrite time to suit their needs. But something had gone wrong. The device had malfunctioned at some point, causing permanent rifts in time, which they had struggled to fix. It was this very device that had caused the anomalies I had been investigating, the odd shifts in history, the moments that didn't quite add up. I stared at the machine in awe and fear. I had uncovered the first real piece of the puzzle. The Time Lord's power was no longer some distant theory or abstract concept. It was real. And now, it was in my hands. But with the discovery came an even greater realization. I wasn't just an observer in this conspiracy anymore. I was a part of it. The device was tied to me in ways I couldn't yet understand. Its discovery was only the beginning of something far more dangerous, something that could unravel everything I thought I knew about myself, about time, and about the world. I had uncovered the truth, but in doing so, I had unleashed a new level of peril. Now I had to figure out how to stop them, or if it was even possible. Holding the device in my hands felt surreal. It was small, inconspicuous, and yet it radiated with a strange, almost palpable energy. The moment I touched it, I felt a rush of memories flood my mind. Some were mine, some felt foreign. It was as though the device was speaking directly to my subconscious, trying to connect with me in ways I didn't understand. I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been waiting for me, that I had somehow been chosen to find it. But why? What was my role in all of this? Thomas watched me closely as I held the device. His expression was a mixture of concern and admiration. He had explained how the Time Lords had used it to manipulate history, but what he didn't explain was why they had kept it hidden for so long. Why hadn't they used it to cement their control once and for all? "You're not just holding a piece of history," Thomas said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. "You're holding the key to the future, and the past. This thing doesn't just alter the course of history, it reshapes it. It changes events at their very core, creating ripples that echo through time." The weight of his words sank in as I carefully set the device on the table before me. He was right. The implications of what I had uncovered were far greater than I had imagined. I wasn't just digging into a conspiracy anymore. I was standing at the precipice of something much bigger, something that could rewrite everything we knew about the world. I needed to understand how it worked, how this small object could alter time itself. The answer lay in the records Thomas had shown me, years of research, notes scribbled in the margins of old books, and files from the Time Lord's earliest experiments. The more I read, the more I began to see the intricate web they had woven over the centuries. They hadn't just manipulated major events, they had subtly guided humanity's progress, pushing us in one direction while hiding the truth about who was really in control. But the more I learned, the more I realized that their manipulations weren't perfect. Time wasn't as malleable as they had hoped. Small changes led to unintended consequences, anomalies that left cracks in the fabric of history. It was in these cracks that I began to see patterns that pointed to places where history had been bent, places where things hadn't gone as planned. That's where I needed to go next. The device was my key, but it needed to be used carefully, strategically. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for the consequences of using it. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could about those anomalies, places where the past had been reshaped. Some were famous events, like the assassination of a prominent figure, but others were far more obscure, moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but were pivotal in shaping the world. The more I uncovered, the more I began to realize the Time Lords had been involved in everything from the rise of nations to the fall of empires. They had shaped wars, economies, even entire civilizations. But what stood out to me the most was an event I had never heard of, a meeting between two unknown figures in 1932. The details were scarce, but there was something in the way it was written that made me pause. It had been a turning point in the development of new technology, and after that meeting, everything changed. The project that followed led to the creation of the first prototype for the device I now held. I knew I had to go to the place where that meeting had taken place. The location wasn't far from where I had found the device, but the place itself was a mystery. No one had ever heard of it. No historical records existed, and it had been erased from any documentation. Yet there it was, sitting in plain sight, a hole in the timeline that had been meticulously covered up by the Time Lords. As I prepared to leave, Thomas warned me again. "Be careful. The closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous this becomes." You don't just risk your life, you risk the entire future. But I couldn't stop now. The more I uncovered, the more I realized I was the only one who could stop them. The Time Lords had their hands in everything, but they had made one mistake. They hadn't accounted for me. I had stumbled upon their secrets, and now, I was going to use them against them. I took a deep breath as I stared at the map. The next step was clear. I had to find the meeting place, unravel the mystery of what had happened there, and figure out how it all connected to the device. The past was reshaped, and now, it was up to me to find out how. I thought I was prepared for whatever was to come, but nothing could have prepared me for the web of deception and betrayal that I was about to walk into. With the device in hand and my newfound knowledge of the anomalies in history, I believed I was one step closer to exposing the Time Lords. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that no one, not even the people I thought I could trust, was who they seemed to be. Maria had warned me about the dangers of getting too close to the timekeepers. "Trust no one," she had said, her voice sharp with caution. "This is bigger than you can imagine. There are forces at work that you won't see coming. And once you're involved, there's no turning back." At the time, I thought she was just being paranoid. But now, standing in front of a man I thought was an ally, I understood what she meant. I had tracked down a member of the Timekeepers, a man named Elijah, who claimed to have information that would lead us straight to the heart of the Time Lord's operation. He had been in hiding for years, just like the rest of the group, and had been feeding me information from the shadows. We had made contact through encrypted messages, and everything had seemed fine. But when we met face to face, something felt off. Elijah was a tall man, his face weathered by time and experience, but his eyes betrayed a sharp intelligence, one that had been honed by years of playing the game in the shadows. He greeted me like an old friend, shaking my hand firmly, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made me uneasy. It was as if he was sizing me up, trying to gauge how much I knew, how much I could be trusted. "We're getting close," he said, his voice low, as we sat in a dark corner of an abandoned warehouse. "But there are things you don't know. Things I didn't think I'd have to tell you." I waited, sensing that he was about to reveal something important. Elijah was a valuable ally, but his cryptic warnings had only made me more suspicious. "These anomalies you're chasing," he continued, "they're not just random events. They were designed to keep certain people in power, the Time Lords. But there's more to this than you realize. They've been manipulating time, yes, but they've also been manipulating you." His words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elijah leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. "You've been a part of this from the beginning. The Time Lords have been using you. You think you've been uncovering their secrets, but they've known about you all along. Every step you've taken has been part of their plan." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying? That's everything I've done. Has it been for nothing?" "Not for nothing," he corrected me. "But you've been played. Your memories, your past, they've been altered. You've been manipulated to believe that you're on the side of the good guys, but you're not. You've been conditioned to believe in the cause, to trust the timekeepers, to think you're fighting for the truth. But the truth is, you don't know who's on your side anymore." His words echoed in my mind. Had I been used all along? Was I just another pawn in their game? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. I had felt strange anomalies in my own memories, the flashes of confusion, the moments when I couldn't remember what had really happened. It was like my past was a jumbled mess of disconnected pieces, and the more I tried to make sense of it, the more I realized that I couldn't trust what I thought I knew. Elijah's confession left me reeling. But before I could respond, the door to the warehouse creaked open, and two men stepped inside. They were dressed in black, their faces hidden beneath hoods, but I could tell by their posture that they weren't just some random intruders. "You should have listened to me," Elijah said, his voice now cold and distant. "They'd been watching you. You're not the first one they've betrayed." I turned to look at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you mean?" But it was too late. One of the men pulled a gun from under his coat, pointing it directly at Elijah. Before I could react, the other man grabbed me, his grip iron tight, forcing me back against the wall. "You thought you were in control," the man holding me said. "But you've been a pawn in a game you can't even begin to understand." As they dragged me out of the warehouse, I realized the truth. I had been played. My trust in Elijah, in the timekeepers, had been misplaced. I wasn't just up against the Time Lords anymore. I was surrounded by enemies on all sides, and every ally I had was just another layer of deception. The lines between friend and foe had blurred, and now I had no choice but to figure out how to survive in a world where no one could be trusted. Everything I thought I knew was slipping through my fingers, like sand in the wind. I had been used, betrayed, and manipulated by the very people I had trusted to help me expose the truth. But as I was dragged through the dark alleys and abandoned warehouses, one question kept running through my mind: why? I should have died. It was only by sheer luck, or perhaps fate, that I managed to escape the men who had captured me. They didn't even seem like they were trying to kill me. It was like they wanted to send a message, one that would leave me broken, confused, and lost. And they succeeded. When I finally managed to get away, I found myself wandering the streets, disoriented. I didn't know where I was or how I had gotten there. My memories were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Everything felt off. I tried to think back to the moments before my capture, but it was like trying to remember a dream. The edges were fuzzy, the details blurred. How had I ended up in that warehouse in the first place? How much time had passed since I last saw Maria, since I first encountered the device? The answers eluded me. As I stumbled through the city, trying to make sense of it all, a terrifying thought dawned on me. What if my memories had been tampered with? It had happened before. The feeling of déjà vu, the disconnection between events in my past, the glitches in my recollections, all pointed to one thing: manipulation. The Time Lords had been playing with time, altering history, and it was possible that they had done the same to me. Maybe my memories weren't even mine. Maybe the person I thought I was, the things I thought I'd done, were all a lie. I found myself back at the old bookstore where I had once uncovered crucial information about the timekeepers. The air inside was thick with the smell of old paper and dust, but it felt familiar, comforting. The owner, a man named Samuel, had always been kind to me. He was one of the few people I still trusted. When I walked in, Samuel's eyes widened in surprise. "You look different," he said, his voice laced with concern. I glanced at him, feeling a strange sense of disconnection. "I don't know what's real anymore," I admitted. I think they've been messing with my memories." He stared at me for a long moment before stepping closer. "There are ways to alter memories, you know. It's not just about erasing things. Sometimes they plant false memories. They make you think you've experienced something that never happened." I froze. "You mean it's possible they could change my past?" He nodded slowly. "It's more than possible. If the Time Lords really have the technology to manipulate time, altering memories would be a natural extension of that power. They could rewrite history, not just on a global scale, but on an individual one." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "But why me? Why would they do that to me?" Samuel's face softened with empathy. "You were a threat. You started asking the wrong questions. They knew that you were getting close to the truth. So, they had to make sure you couldn't remember it. They erased parts of your past to keep you from finding out what you really are." "What do you mean, what I really am?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Samuel hesitated. "You're more connected to this than you realize. The Time Lords didn't just alter your memories, They created them. They used you as a part of their plan, and you're so deeply embedded in it that you might never be able to see the truth clearly again. The words hit me like a hammer. I staggered backward, my breath catching in my throat. You mean I'm not who I think I am? Samuel didn't answer right away. He simply turned and walked toward a shelf at the back of the shop, pulling down an old leather-bound book. He opened it to a page near the middle and handed it to me. On the page was a name that sent a cold wave of terror through my veins: Victor Graves. My heart stopped. No, I whispered. No, this can't be right. The book showed details of Victor Graves' involvement in the creation of the time manipulation technology, the same technology the Time Lords used. But there was something even more chilling about it. The book also mentioned my name, Alexander Graves. My mind raced, unable to process the information. Victor Graves, I muttered. That's my name too. What does this mean? Samuel's eyes darkened. It means you were a part of their plan from the start. You're not just someone who stumbled upon their secret. You were created to find the device. You were manipulated, conditioned, made to be part of the conspiracy without ever knowing it. I stumbled back, the truth crashing down on me like a wave. My whole life, everything I thought I knew about myself, was a lie. I wasn't just caught in a conspiracy. I was created to be a part of it. My world tilted, and for the first time since I had started this investigation, I didn't know who I could trust, or even who I really was. The Time Lords had manipulated time, had rewritten my memories, and now they were watching me unravel. And as the fog of confusion lifted, I realized one terrifying truth: if my memories were fake, then maybe I was never supposed to uncover the truth. Maybe I wasn't meant to escape this trap at all. The more I uncovered, the less certain I became. Every time I thought I was getting closer to the truth, the ground beneath me seemed to shift, and I found myself grasping at threads that only unraveled further. The truth had become an elusive thing, always just out of reach, taunting me with its power and knowledge while slipping away each time I tried to grab hold. But now, with the shocking revelation about my own identity, the fact that I was tied to the Time Lords' manipulation more than I had ever imagined, I could no longer deny it. I was too deeply embedded in their plan. It wasn't just that they had altered my memories, it was that they had designed me to find them, to expose their secrets, and in doing so, to become part of their game. I felt like a puppet. A puppet with strings that had been tugged in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I had to confront them. The timekeeper's warnings and the cryptic messages had all been pieces of a puzzle, one that had led me here, to this point of no return. The device, the memories, the hidden moments in history, all of it pointed toward one inevitable conclusion: the Time Lords were real, and I was somehow part of their web. But there was a chance, a slim chance, that I could still stop them. If I could just get to the heart of their operations, confront the mastermind, and destroy the device that had been used to manipulate time itself, maybe I could undo everything they had done. But the more I dug, the more I realized there was something else. The further I pushed toward the truth, the more I could feel the walls closing in. It wasn't just the Time Lords watching me now. There were other forces, other factions, hidden groups with their own agenda. I had been foolish to think I could trust anyone in this fight. The timekeepers weren't as trustworthy as I had thought. The more I researched, the more I uncovered their involvement in certain events, some that had been manipulated for their own benefit, using the very technology they wanted to destroy. I could feel it, the tightening noose. I was no longer just a passive observer. I was a player in a game far bigger than me, and the more I learned, the more I realized how much I didn't know. My very existence had been shaped by these events, and if I exposed everything, if I laid it bare, would it even matter? Would the Time Lords just erase the truth, as they had erased so much else? I had to make a choice. As I sat in the dimly lit room, surrounded by the files and records that had brought me to this point, The weight of the decision hit me like a ton of bricks. The device was within my reach. I had found the hidden location, the place where history had been reshaped. I had the power to bring it all down. But there were consequences. There were always consequences. The more I thought about the people I had lost, the betrayals I had faced, the more I realized that perhaps the world wasn't ready for the truth. The past had been changed, manipulated in ways I couldn't begin to fathom, and now I was standing on the precipice. The Time Lords had shaped everything: wars, elections, movements, and I was part of their plan. But if I exposed them, if I revealed everything, would I be undoing the very fabric of time? Would the consequences of revealing their control be even worse than what they had done? The decision was mine, but the weight of it was crushing. I thought about the people I loved, about those I had lost, and the lives I had touched along the way. The echoes of their struggles reverberated in my mind. Could I live with the consequences of exposing everything, knowing that I would be changing the course of history itself? I had been close before. I had almost found the truth, almost understood the scope of their control. But every time I thought I was at the end, I found myself deeper in the web of lies. And now, standing at the crossroads of my investigation, I realized the truth wasn't just about exposing the Time Lords. It was about understanding what they had done to me, what they had done to everyone, and whether or not I could bear the responsibility of unearthing the past. I couldn't walk away now. But did I even know who I was anymore? Was I part of the plan, or had I become a force of resistance? The final decision was coming. I could feel it in the air, a palpable tension, a pull that could not be denied. It would all come down to this moment, the moment when the truth would either destroy me or set me free. Everything had led to this moment. I stood on the precipice, gazing at the device that had brought me to the edge of my sanity, the truth just beyond my reach. The past had been twisted, bent, and reshaped by the hands of the Time Lords, and now I held the power to undo it all. But at what cost? I had spent so long chasing the truth, unraveling the conspiracy thread by thread, that I had lost sight of the larger picture. What if everything I had learned, everything I had uncovered, was just part of their design? What if I had been manipulated, just like everyone else in history? What if my very quest for truth had been orchestrated to bring me to this point? I clenched my fist around the device, feeling its weight and power. It hummed in my hand, as if it were alive, waiting for me to make the decision that would change everything. I had discovered too much. I knew the places where time had been manipulated, the historical events that had been altered, the moments where the fabric of reality itself had been bent. And now, standing at the heart of the Time Lord's operation, I knew I had to make a choice. The device had the power to change everything, to rewrite time and erase the past, to undo the Time Lord's control. But would it be worth the consequences? The sound of footsteps behind me broke my concentration. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Elijah. I knew you'd come to this, he said, his voice laced with a mix of resignation and admiration. He stepped into view, his eyes focused on the device in my hand. You were always meant to be here, to make this choice. I faced him, my heart racing. What do you mean, Elijah? What are you talking about? He shook his head slowly. You've been part of the Time Lord's plan from the beginning, Alexandra. You were chosen to find the truth, to uncover their secrets. But what you don't understand is that everything you've done has been part of their design. You were never meant to stop them. You were meant to lead them to this moment. I staggered back, disbelief flooding my mind. No. That can't be true. It's true, Elijah said softly, his eyes filled with a strange sadness. The Time Lords didn't just manipulate time. They've manipulated you, your memories, your purpose. You were always meant to find the device, to bring it to this point. The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. Had I really been a pawn all along? Had everything I'd done, every step I'd taken, been part of their plan? The memories they had altered, the betrayals I had suffered, the truths I had uncovered, they were all part of a carefully crafted narrative. A narrative designed to bring me here, to this exact moment. I felt the device in my hand pulse with an unnatural energy, as if it were aware of the turmoil inside me. The weight of the world pressed down on me. I was standing on the edge of something monumental, a decision that would affect not only my future, but the future of the world itself. "I can stop them," I said, my voice trembling. "I can expose everything. I can undo what they've done." Elijah's expression softened. "You can. But you'll also erase everything else, the lives they've touched, the people they've saved, the balance they've created. You'll unravel time, and no one will know what's real anymore. The world will be in chaos." I stared at him, torn between my desire to expose the truth and my fear of what would happen if I did. Could I live with the consequences of undoing everything? Could I sacrifice the world I knew, even if it meant freeing it from the Time Lord's control? For a long moment, there was silence between us. Then I made my decision. I raised the device, feeling its energy surge through my body, and I pressed the button. The world around me seemed to shudder, like time itself was buckling under the pressure of the change. I felt a rush of power, of knowledge, flooding through me, as if I had just reset the entire timeline. But instead of feeling victorious, I felt empty, lost in the void between what had been and what was yet to come. I turned to Elijah, who looked at me with a mixture of regret and admiration. "You did it," he said softly. "But now we live in a world with no history, no past. Everything you knew is gone, and nothing will ever be the same." The device in my hand flickered, its energy dissipating as the timeline stabilized. I had done it. I had stopped the Time Lords. I had rewritten history. But at what cost? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the world was different now. The past was gone. The future was uncertain. And I was left standing at the crossroads, wondering what came next. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, holding the key to one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. My name is Marcus Drake, and for the past decade, I've made a career out of tracking down lost treasures and uncovering relics that were meant to stay buried. But what I found in that isolated cave on the Mediterranean coast wasn't just another artifact. It was a map, half decayed and covered in symbols that didn't match any language I'd seen before. At first, I thought it was just another old map, maybe some ancient navigational tool or a treasure hunter's fantasy. But the symbols were intricate and deliberate, and the map itself was clearly much older than anything I had dealt with before. It wasn't the crumbling paper or the strange markings that made my pulse race, but the message it held. A cryptic message written in what seemed like a forgotten tongue, but it pointed to something far more extraordinary: the legendary city of Atlantis. For years I had heard stories about Atlantis, how it was swallowed by the sea, a once thriving civilization lost to the waves of time. Most people thought it was just a myth, a fantasy concocted by philosophers and poets. But here I was, holding evidence that suggested otherwise. The map was real, and it wasn't leading to just any island. It was leading to the heart of what was once Atlantis itself. I gathered my team, a group of experts I trusted implicitly. There was Claire, a historian with a specialization in ancient civilizations, and Jackson, a tech specialist who could handle anything digital. We had all worked together on smaller projects before, but this was different. We were no longer chasing ordinary treasures. We were about to uncover something that could change the course of history forever. The cave where I found the map was as desolate as it was beautiful, hidden away in a place most people wouldn't dare to venture. With the first step toward the ruins, I felt it, the weight of history, the pull of the unknown. The closer we got to unraveling this mystery, the more we realized that what we were chasing wasn't just an ancient city, it was an untapped power. A power that could reshape the future, if we were lucky enough to understand it. We started piecing together the clues from the map, and as we did, we began to understand the magnitude of what we were about to face. This was more than just a treasure hunt. It was a race against time, against forces we hadn't even begun to comprehend. The journey ahead would be more dangerous than any of us could have imagined. But one thing was certain, we couldn't turn back now. Atlantis wasn't just a story, it was waiting for us to unlock its secrets. The day we followed the map's coordinates was one of those days where everything felt like it was happening too fast. We were standing on a small Mediterranean island that had no name on modern maps, only whispers from old sailors and fishermen who claimed that the island held secrets that no one dared to uncover. As we trekked through the overgrown vegetation and rocky terrain, the tension in the air was palpable. The ruins we found weren't anything special at first glance, just another abandoned settlement, worn down by centuries of neglect. But we weren't here to admire the architecture. We were here to find Atlantis. Our first real breakthrough came when Claire spotted an unusual crack in the stone. It wasn't natural, at least not in the way the island's other formations were. It was perfectly straight, almost too perfect. When we pried open the gap, we found a hidden passageway, deep and dark, with walls covered in symbols that matched the ones on the map. This was the moment everything changed. Descending into the darkness, we encountered a labyrinth of tunnels. The deeper we went, the more the air felt charged, as if something was waiting for us. At the end of the passage, we found a chamber that seemed untouched by time. And there, resting on a stone pedestal, was a crystal-like object. It wasn't the size that stunned me, but the way it pulsed with an almost alive energy. Jackson, the tech guy, immediately connected a few wires from his portable scanner to the crystal. As soon as he made the connection, the object glowed and hummed with energy. And then it happened. The crystal projected a holographic image, one that covered the entire room. I could barely breathe as I watched the hologram unfold before us. The image showed Atlantis at its peak, towers of gleaming marble, massive machines that seemed to manipulate the very weather. The crystal flickered, revealing cities beneath the sea, flying ships, and something even more baffling, a machine that controlled the climate, adjusting the temperature, generating storms, even taming hurricanes. We stood there, frozen, as the implications of what we were seeing hit me all at once. Atlantis didn't just have technology, they had power over nature itself. This wasn't just about gold or relics. This was something far more dangerous. We were no longer just looking for the lost city. We were dealing with the remains of a civilization that had controlled the Earth's very elements. And as we watched the holographic images of storms raging across the globe and seas boiling, one thing became clear. This technology, if it still existed, was not meant to be in anyone's hands. "We need to get out of here," Claire said, breaking the silence. "If this technology still exists, it could change everything, and not in a good way." Jackson, still staring at the hologram, was already trying to figure out how to preserve the data. But I knew we couldn't stay here forever. The Dominion was out there, watching. This wasn't just about treasure anymore. We had become part of something much bigger, something that could alter the world as we knew it. I shoved the panic rising in my chest down, forcing myself to focus. We had the first piece. Now we needed the rest. But as I turned to leave the chamber, something in the back of my mind nagged at me. This wasn't a treasure hunt. It was a ticking time bomb. I've always known that treasure hunting isn't just about finding hidden gems, it's about surviving the search. But this was different. What we were digging up was no ordinary treasure. We weren't just uncovering relics of a forgotten civilization. We were pulling the threads of a dangerous web. The first sign that we weren't alone came when Claire noticed something off during our hike to another part of the island. A flash of movement in the trees, too quick, too calculated to be an animal. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But it wasn't. When we reached the next site, a cluster of ancient stone structures half buried by time, I saw it, a shadowy figure, crouching behind a pillar. Then, just as fast as it had appeared, it was gone. "We're being watched," Claire muttered under her breath. The next few days were a blur. We continued following the clues on the map, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being tracked. Every time we found a lead, we encountered more signs of someone, or something, keeping tabs on us. At first, it was just weird noises in the distance. Then, we started finding small but telling signs, discarded equipment that didn't belong to us, strange footprints, and even a camera left carelessly behind one of the old walls we had explored. And then it hit me, the Dominion. They had been following us since the moment we found the map. I'd heard whispers about them before, a shadowy organization that had its hands in everything from politics to science. But I never thought they'd be involved in something like this. It became clear that the Dominion wasn't just a group of rich elites. They were a group that wanted control over the power of Atlantis. And they'd do anything to stop anyone who got too close. I didn't have long to process this realization before it escalated. On the 5th day of our search, we encountered them, mercenaries, armed and ruthless. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to take us out. The first attack came while we were inside a small cave, just outside the ruins of what appeared to be a temple. We were making our way through a narrow passage when we heard the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground. I barely had time to react before the first mercenary appeared, gun raised. We took cover quickly, but not fast enough. Jackson, trying to set up a defensive perimeter with his tech, barely had time to fire up his equipment before the assailants were on us. In the ensuing chaos, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Claire managed to disable one of them with a well-placed shot, but there were too many. We fought back, but it was clear that these weren't just random thugs. They were well-trained, organized, and willing to do whatever it took to get to the map. For the first time, I questioned our decision to continue. What if we weren't just searching for answers? What if we were setting ourselves up for a catastrophe? "We need to get out," Claire said, breathless from the fight. "This isn't just about treasure anymore. They'll kill us to protect whatever's down here." And she was right. But it was too late to turn back. We had come too far, and I couldn't let the Dominion win, not when we were so close. As we retreated deeper into the caves, I realized the stakes had changed. We weren't just trying to uncover history. We were fighting to prevent a future none of us could imagine. And with each step we took, I knew we were getting closer to a force so powerful that no one, least of all the Dominion, should ever control it. The deeper we went into the heart of the island, the more we began to uncover, and the more we started to realize how dangerous our quest had become. We were no longer chasing gold or forgotten relics. We were uncovering the kind of knowledge that could shape the very future of humanity, for better or worse. And with every new discovery, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that we might be opening Pandora's box. The first real clue about the scale of Atlantis's technological prowess came when we stumbled upon a library of sorts. The walls were covered in carvings and writings, some of them old, others more recent, as if someone had tried to decode them over time. The texts were a mix of different languages, most of them unreadable, but there was one symbol that kept appearing, an intricate spiral, a motif that seemed to represent an energy flow. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that this was no simple artistic design. It was a diagram, a blueprint. Jackson and Claire worked together to analyze the texts. Jackson, with his tech skills, used his portable scanner to capture the images, while Claire meticulously translated what she could. Slowly, we pieced together the puzzle. It became clear that the Atlanteans had discovered a way to manipulate energy, not just electricity or magnetism, but the very forces of nature itself. They could create storms, generate earthquakes, and even influence the planet's climate. The more we dug, the more it became obvious. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was godlike power. "We're not dealing with a city here," Claire said, her voice low as she skimmed through the translated texts. "We're dealing with an entire civilization that understands and controls forces we can't even begin to fathom." It was hard to wrap my mind around the magnitude of what we were uncovering. The documents described machines that could summon hurricanes and droughts, earthquakes that could level entire cities, and energy sources that could sustain the entire planet indefinitely. But there was also a warning. The same symbol we'd seen everywhere, an intricate spiral, appeared again in the context of a prophecy. It spoke of a time when the power of Atlantis would be sought after once more, but it warned that the technology should never be used by anyone who didn't fully understand its consequences. As we sifted through the texts, I couldn't help but wonder, had the Atlanteans fallen because of their own technology? Had their greed or arrogance led them to unleash forces they couldn't control? If so, what made us any different? We were the ones standing at the threshold of uncovering the very same power. And that power, if it fell into the wrong hands, could destroy everything. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that we might not just be facing an ancient, buried city. We might be staring into the abyss of our own future, a future where technology outstripped our ability to control it. And it wasn't just the Atlanteans' fate at stake anymore. It was ours. But there was one thing that nagged at me, something that Claire and Jackson hadn't caught yet. The Dominion. They weren't just interested in the map or the treasure. They were after something far bigger. They wanted control over the power of Atlantis. And it was clear now more than ever, they would stop at nothing to get it. We had to make a choice. We could back off, turn our backs on this discovery, and leave the island. But I knew deep down we couldn't. We had come too far. The temptation of knowledge, of understanding this ancient power, was too great. But at the same time, the fear of what could happen if we failed to understand it was terrifying. We were on the precipice of something monumental. And whether we were ready or not, Atlantis was about to reveal its secrets. But the deeper we went, the more I realized that the cost of this knowledge might be more than any of us could afford. The walls of Atlantis were closing in on us. Every step we took, we seemed to move deeper into a maze of uncertainty, with every corner offering new revelations and new dangers. The deeper we ventured, the more we began to understand that Atlantis wasn't just an ancient civilization, it was a warning. We were unlocking something we weren't fully prepared to understand, and now the prophecy, the one we had seen faintly in the ancient texts, seemed all too real. It was late one evening when we found it. A hidden chamber, tucked away beneath the ruins of what appeared to be an ancient council hall. The entrance was cleverly disguised, as though the Atlanteans had anticipated someone, someday, would come looking for answers. As we pried open the entrance, the air inside felt colder than the rest of the island. The walls were covered with symbols, most of which we had seen before, but now, there was something different about them. Something more urgent. In the center of the room, there was a pedestal, and on it, a small, weathered stone tablet. It wasn't large, but the energy in the room shifted when we placed our hands on it. As soon as I touched it, the world around me seemed to blur. A flood of images hit me, faster than I could process, and I found myself staring at holographic projections, just like the one from the crystal. But this time, it was different. The projections were a series of images, cities rising and falling, entire civilizations disappearing under the weight of their own power. But one image stood out, a map. It wasn't a map of places, it was a map of time. It showed various key moments in history, points where the Atlanteans had altered events, controlled disasters, and steered the course of human development. And that's when it hit me, Atlantis wasn't just about controlling the weather. It had controlled the very fabric of history itself. The prophecy on the stone tablet was clear. It warned that this power, the power to manipulate time and space, could either save humanity or destroy it. But the warning went further. If this power fell into the wrong hands, it would unleash chaos on a scale that even the Atlanteans couldn't have imagined. Claire and Jackson stared at the tablet, equally stunned. But while Claire was still trying to process what we had just uncovered, Jackson immediately started working on extracting data from the holographic images. He wasn't just fascinated by the technology. He was looking for answers. What was it that we had just unlocked? What did this map, this power, truly mean? "We have to stop," Claire said, her voice shaking. "This is too dangerous. We need to leave." But Jackson wasn't listening. He was too focused on the data, too invested in finding out how this ancient technology worked. I could see the allure in his eyes, the same obsession I had when I first started on this journey. The question was no longer just about treasure, it was about power. And the more we uncovered, the more it became clear that power had consequences. The prophecy, now, it felt less like a warning and more like a countdown. The more we uncovered, the more I realized that our actions might have already triggered something we couldn't control. Atlantis had survived for thousands of years, but if we kept going, we might be the ones to unravel it all. And then came the next realization. We weren't just up against the forces of nature, or even the forgotten past of Atlantis. We were up against the Dominion. Their pursuit wasn't about treasure, it was about control. They were just waiting for us to unlock the final pieces, to give them the power to reshape the world in their image. I knew then that this wasn't just an archaeological dig. This was a fight for the future of humanity. If we kept going, we would have to deal with consequences beyond anything we could imagine. But turning back wasn't an option. The technology was out there, and the Dominion wouldn't rest until they controlled it. "We have no choice," I said, looking at my team. "We have to keep moving forward. But we do it carefully. Every step from now on could be our last." The further we went, the more I realized how far we'd strayed from what we thought we were doing. This wasn't an academic expedition or a simple treasure hunt anymore. It was a race against shadowy forces that wanted to use what we were uncovering for unimaginable power. The Dominion had made it clear that they were willing to do whatever it took to stop us, or use us to further their own goals. Our journey had started with the excitement of uncovering the secrets of Atlantis, but now, every corner we turned felt like an entry into a nightmare. It wasn't just the physical threats anymore. It was the constant pressure of knowing we were being hunted. There was no place to hide on this island, no safe zone, no way to stop the Dominion from getting their hands on what we had found. We were in their sights, and they weren't going to let us go without a fight. It wasn't until we discovered the second chamber beneath the Grand Temple that things took a turn for the worse. The walls of the chamber were lined with strange devices, machines unlike anything I had ever seen before. Some appeared to be energy conductors, others resembled complex calculators, and there were some that I could only guess were meant for controlling environmental factors, like weather patterns and seismic activity. But as Jackson worked feverishly to scan the devices, I felt it again, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. We weren't alone. Before I could warn Claire, the trap was sprung. The first shot came from the shadows, the crack of a high-powered rifle splitting the air. Claire dove to the side, barely avoiding the bullet that tore through the air where she'd been standing. The echo of the shot was enough to rattle my nerves. "Move! Get to cover!" I shouted. We scattered, each of us ducking behind whatever we could find as the mercenaries poured in from the shadows. They were everywhere, closing in from all sides. The Dominion had sent their best. No more hired guns, no more amateurs. These guys were trained professionals, and they were here for one thing, the technology we were digging up. The next few minutes were chaotic. Gunfire, shouting, and the sharp scent of gunpowder filled the air. I barely had time to reload before I saw one of the mercenaries draw a bead on Jackson. He was still focused on scanning the machine, his back to the approaching danger. I moved instinctively, grabbing a rock and throwing it to distract the gunman, but it wasn't enough. The mercenary fired. "Jackson!" Claire screamed. I didn't stop to think. I rushed toward him, diving in front of him just in time to take the bullet in my shoulder. The pain was instant, sharp, and blinding, but I wasn't about to let them win. I couldn't afford to. "Move, Marcus! Move!" Claire screamed, pulling me to safety as the fight continued. She was more composed than I was, but I could see the fear in her eyes. This was no longer about survival. It was about keeping the information we had found out of the Dominion's hands. We barely escaped the cave system. As we ran, I realized something terrifying. This was no longer just an expedition to uncover history. The Dominion wasn't just following us. They were actively sabotaging everything we did. They weren't waiting for us to make the next move. They were ahead of us, controlling the flow of information, manipulating the search for their own benefit. The betrayal came right after that, though I didn't see it coming. A member of our team, Dr. Greger, who had been with us since the beginning, turned on us. It didn't make sense. He had been a part of everything, helping with the translations and decoding the ancient texts, but his actions became erratic. One night, he disappeared from camp, only to reappear hours later with a troubling confession. He had been working with the Dominion from the start. He was the mole. The shock of it hit me like a freight train. I had trusted Greger. He had been a part of our team, someone I thought shared our sense of purpose. But now it was clear, he was never on our side. "They'll stop at nothing," Greger said in a cold, detached tone. "You've already gone too far. Now you have a choice. Give up the technology and walk away, or fight, and you'll all die here." It was a sobering moment. The Dominion wasn't just some shadowy threat anymore. They were in our ranks, and they had no intention of letting us walk away with anything. I was bleeding, exhausted, and betrayed, but the thought of backing down wasn't an option. The technology of Atlantis had to be kept safe. If it fell into the wrong hands, it would be catastrophic. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, barely able to raise my voice. "We finished this. The countdown has begun." The Dominion was closing in, and the full scale of the battle had just begun. We were trapped. At least, that's what it felt like. Every step we took in the ruins led to more uncertainty. The Dominion had us on the run, and Greger's betrayal had opened my eyes to just how much danger we were in. But despite all that, I couldn't stop now. The deeper we ventured into the heart of Atlantis, the clearer it became that what we were looking for wasn't just buried treasure or lost history. It was power. Power that could reshape the world, and if we weren't careful, destroy it. It was Claire who found it, the hidden temple. It was buried beneath layers of ancient stone, a structure so old that it was barely visible to the untrained eye. The entrance was tucked away behind a false wall in the deepest part of the ruins, and it wasn't until we started deciphering a sequence of symbols that we realized the significance of the spot. The Atlanteans had hidden their most dangerous artifact in plain sight, covered by centuries of neglect. The walls of the temple were adorned with intricate carvings, depicting what looked like gods manipulating natural forces, controlling the weather, earthquakes, and even controlling the flow of time itself. It wasn't just an ancient city we were uncovering. It was the heart of a civilization that had mastered forces beyond our understanding. In the center of the temple stood the device. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, towering, mechanical, and intricate, with wires, gears, and crystal-like components glowing faintly in the dim light. The device appeared dormant, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for something to activate it. Jackson, who had been quiet for the last few hours, was the first to approach it. His hands moved over the machine with a reverence that bordered on obsession, his eyes scanning every detail, trying to decipher the tech that had been lost for millennia. "It's here," he murmured, almost to himself. "The power. It's all here." And just like that, the room shifted. I felt the temperature drop, the air around me thick with static, as if the very walls were coming alive. The device began to hum, its energy surging like an electrical storm trapped inside. The ground shook slightly, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating in my bones. The power of Atlantis was awakening. Suddenly, the door at the far end of the temple slammed open. We weren't alone. The Dominion's leader, a man I had only heard rumors about, stepped into the chamber. He was tall, wearing dark, tactical gear, his face hidden behind a mask. The moment he entered, I knew what his intention was: to take control of the machine, to harness its power for his own gain. "I knew you'd find it," the leader said, his voice low and menacing. "But it's too late. This is where the power belongs, under my control. Not if we can help it." I snapped back, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My shoulders still throbbed, the pain a constant reminder of just how close we had come to losing everything. The tension was palpable. The Dominion was here to take the technology, and we weren't going to let them do it. But as we faced off against the mercenaries, I couldn't help but wonder if we were already too late. The device, now activated, was humming louder. The holographic projections around us showed images of weather systems being altered, vast storms being controlled, and energy storms forming over the oceans. This wasn't just a machine, it was a weapon. Claire stepped forward, her hand gripping her gun. "We can't let them use this," she said firmly. "We have to destroy it before it falls into their hands." But the leader only laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. "You think you can destroy it? You don't even understand what this machine is capable of." Jackson had been silent, but now his voice cut through the tension. "You're right. We don't understand it completely. But we do understand one thing: it can't be controlled by people like you. It's too dangerous. And we won't let you use it." The Dominion leader's eyes flashed with anger, but before he could respond, there was a deafening crash. The device, reacting to the conflict, began to hum even louder, its energy surging wildly. It was almost as if it was alive, feeding off our fear, our conflict. I turned to Claire. "We can't let them take it. We have to shut it down, now." But as the device pulsed with power, the prophecy echoed in my mind, the one we'd read earlier, the one that warned of the consequences of unleashing this kind of power. I knew then that we were standing at the edge of something catastrophic. If the Dominion controlled the device, they could alter history itself. If we tried to destroy it, who knew what kind of chaos we might unleash? But there was no turning back. The stakes were too high. We had to make our move. Everything had changed in an instant. The very technology we had uncovered, the power that had been dormant for thousands of years, was now fully awake, and it was beyond our control. The device, which had started as a low hum, now reverberated through the temple with such intensity that I could feel it deep in my bones. The air was thick with static, crackling like a storm was about to break loose. Each pulse of energy sent tremors through the floor beneath our feet. Jackson was still glued to the machine, trying to figure out how to control it, but even he looked overwhelmed. His hands were shaking as he tapped furiously on his devices, trying to stabilize the energy surges. "Jackson, get away from it!" Claire shouted over the chaos, but he didn't hear her. He was too far gone, too fixated on unlocking the secrets of the technology. Then came the sound of footsteps. I looked up, and there, standing in the doorway of the temple, was Gregor. His eyes were cold, his face hard. He had betrayed us before, and now it seemed that he had fully embraced his new allegiance to the Dominion. "You're too late," Gregor said, a sickening smile creeping onto his face. "The power of Atlantis belongs to us now. You should have known better than to play with forces you don't understand." I wanted to shout at him, to tell him that he had no idea what he was dealing with. But my words caught in my throat. The device was starting to hum louder, and the walls were trembling. There was no time for arguments. There was only time for action. "We're not giving it to you," I said, stepping toward him. "You'll destroy everything if you use it." Gregor laughed, a hollow, cruel laugh. "You're too sentimental, Marcus. power like this can't be ignored. It has to be harnessed, controlled. You've seen what it can do. You've seen what we could do with it. I could feel the rage building inside me. This wasn't just about stopping the Dominion anymore. It was personal. They had manipulated us, betrayed us, and now they wanted to control the very thing that could reshape the world. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not on my watch. Claire, get to the control panel, I shouted, my voice breaking through the tension. We need to shut it down, now. But just as Claire made a move toward the panel, Gregor blocked her path. He wasn't the same person we'd known. The man who had worked beside us, the one who had decoded the text with Claire, he was gone. In his place stood someone who would do anything to secure the power of Atlantis for himself. Stay out of this, Gregor snarled. This isn't about you anymore. As Gregor's words hung in the air, the machine gave a deafening roar. I felt it, an intense surge of energy blasting through the room, the power of Atlantis now fully awakened. It was as if the entire island was alive, shaking with the energy that was being unleashed. The power to control weather, to manipulate time, it was all real, and it was slipping from our control. We had no more time to argue. The Dominion was closing in, and the machine was about to reach its critical threshold. If we didn't act now, everything we had uncovered, everything we had fought for, would be lost. Move! I yelled, pushing Gregor aside, but he didn't fight me. Instead, he stepped back, almost as if he was waiting for something. Waiting for the final moment when the power would be his. Claire had reached the control panel. Her fingers flew across the buttons, her eyes wide with determination. But as she worked, I could see her hesitation. She knew what I knew, that shutting down the device could have unpredictable consequences. We were on the edge of something catastrophic. Do it, Claire! I urged. We can't risk it. But before she could react, the ground shook beneath us. The energy surged again, the entire temple now vibrating as if it was going to collapse. The walls cracked, debris falling from the ceiling. We had seconds, no more. Then, the prophecy echoed in my mind once more. He who awakens Atlantis must choose the future of the world. A decision between salvation and destruction. I knew then what I had to do. I had to make the choice, not just for myself, but for the future. The device wasn't just a tool, it was a test, and it had been waiting for someone to make the right decision. As Claire activated the shutdown sequence, the device's hum started to die down. The energy surges slowed, the machine gradually losing its power. But not before a final, terrifying pulse of energy ripped through the chamber. The walls crumbled, and the island itself began to shift, as though it was resisting the shutdown. We barely escaped. The temple collapsed behind us as we sprinted through the ruins, the final echoes of Atlantis's power now fading into the distance. I glanced back one last time, knowing that whatever happened next, the world had just narrowly avoided a disaster. We didn't have much time left. The final stages of our search for Atlantis had become a blur of chaos, betrayal, and shifting alliances. The temple was collapsing, the ancient power we had uncovered was still coursing through the island, and the Dominion was relentless. But we weren't backing down. Not now. As we made our way back to the heart of the ruins, I could feel the tension building. The air was thick with the pulse of the machine, still alive with energy. It had been shut down, but its power hadn't fully dissipated. It was like an animal, wounded but not yet defeated. And I knew that the Dominion would stop at nothing to get it back under their control. We're almost there, Claire said, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the island's shaking foundation. But we need to act fast. The Dominion won't give up, and they'll kill us all if we don't. I nodded grimly. I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the future of the entire world. The machine we had uncovered had the power to change history, to rewrite the very fabric of time itself. If we didn't destroy it, someone else would use it to control everything. But as we reached the final chamber, I saw something I wasn't expecting: the Dominion's leader standing before the device, his hand hovering over a control panel. He wasn't just going to take the power, he was going to awaken it again. He was going to use it. "You're too late," the leader said, his voice cold, calculating. "I have everything I need. Atlantis' power will be mine. And with it, I will reshape the world." I could feel the weight of his words. This wasn't just about taking control of an ancient machine. This was about reshaping the future, about forcing the world into his vision. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a tyrant, playing God with forces he couldn't understand. "We won't let you," I said, stepping forward. My pulse raced, my body aching from the injuries, but there was no turning back now. The Dominion's leader turned to face me, a sneer crossing his face. "You think you can stop me? You're nothing but ants beneath my feet. The future is mine to control." I wasn't sure if he believed his own words, but I knew one thing for sure: he had no idea what he was about to unleash. As I reached for my weapon, I heard the familiar hum of the device activating once again. The machine roared to life, its energy surging, its power once again threatening to break free. The sky outside darkened, lightning flashing across the horizon, as if the island itself was reacting to the machine's awakening. At that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just about saving the world from the Dominion, it was about saving the world from itself. The power of Atlantis had the potential to reshape everything, but if used incorrectly, it could annihilate everything we knew. The Dominion's leader was ready to unleash that power, and I knew that if we didn't stop him now, it would be too late. Claire, Jackson, and I moved into position, taking cover behind the crumbling walls. We were running out of time, and every second counted. The leader's hand was almost on the button that would activate the machine. I made my move, charging forward, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I fired. The shot missed, but it was enough to startle him. He turned, his eyes flashing with fury. "You think you can stop me?" he shouted. But I wasn't listening to his words anymore. I was focused on the machine. The power that had been dormant for so long was now awakening, and it was going to change everything. If it fell into the wrong hands, it would be the end. We couldn't let that happen. As I sprinted toward the machine, I saw Claire and Jackson making their move too. The Dominion's leader tried to stop us, but it was too late. We reached the console, and together, we worked quickly to disable the machine. With a final, desperate push, the machine's energy began to die down. The lights flickered, the hum quieted, and the power began to dissipate. It wasn't enough. The damage had already been done. The island shook violently as the machine's final surge sent shockwaves through the air. But we had stopped it. We had prevented the power from being unleashed. For a brief moment, everything was still. The machine lay dormant, its power gone. The world felt quiet, as though it was holding its breath. And then, in the distance, I heard the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. The storm had passed. The future was safe, at least for now. But I knew that the secrets of Atlantis would always linger, and the prophecy would never fully be fulfilled. We had stopped one disaster, but there was always the chance that someone else would come looking for the power we had found. As we left the ruins behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And whatever came next, we would have to be ready. The island was quiet now. For all the chaos we had witnessed, for all the power we had nearly unleashed, there was an eerie calm that settled over the ruins. The storm had passed, the thunderous roars of the machine gone. But even as I stood there, catching my breath, I couldn't shake the weight of what we had just done. We had sealed away the power of Atlantis, at least for now. The Dominion had been thwarted, and we had managed to escape with our lives. But the price had been steep. Jackson was injured, Claire was exhausted, and I could still feel the sharp sting in my shoulder where I had been shot. It was over, or so I told myself. But the lingering questions haunted me. Had we made the right choice? Could we have found another way? And what would happen to the knowledge we had uncovered? The power of Atlantis wasn't just a weapon, it was a blueprint for a future that none of us were truly prepared to face. As we made our way out of the temple, I couldn't help but glance back at the ruins. The device was no longer glowing, but its presence still lingered in my mind. The energy, the potential, it was all still there, buried beneath the rubble. I knew that we had only scratched the surface of what Atlantis had achieved. And somewhere out there, someone would come looking for it. "We did it," Claire said, her voice low. "We stopped them. The power's gone." But even as she said it, I knew the truth. The power wasn't gone. It had just been hidden. And that, in itself, was a dangerous thought. The temptation would always be there, lingering in the back of my mind. Would we have to face the Dominion again? Would someone else come after Atlantis' secrets? I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure if anyone could. The trip back to the mainland was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The world had changed. It was hard to believe that just days before, we had been a group of adventurers, chasing the myth of Atlantis. Now, we were witnesses to the true cost of such a discovery. As we docked the boat on the mainland, I felt a sense of finality. But even as I looked out over the calm sea, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. The island, the ruins, the machine, it would all remain hidden, waiting for someone else to find it. "You did the right thing, Marcus," Claire said, breaking the silence. "You saved us." But the truth was, I wasn't so sure. The machine might be dormant, but the knowledge was still out there. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone would eventually come looking for it. And when they did, would they be ready for what Atlantis had left behind? I turned to Claire and Jackson, both of them looking at me with the same uncertain expression. We had made it out alive, but the world was different now. We were no longer just treasure hunters. We were the keepers of a secret that could change everything. "We did what we had to do," I said, my voice steady despite the doubts swirling in my mind. "But this isn't over." "Not really." And as I stared out at the horizon, I knew one thing for certain: the echoes of Atlantis would never truly fade. They would always be there, waiting for the next person to stumble upon them. And when they did, we would have to be ready. Because the future was still up for grabs, and we had just barely averted a catastrophe. But the prophecy, the one that had haunted me throughout this entire journey, still whispered in the back of my mind. It wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I had no idea what was happening to me at first. It all started with what seemed like just a bad night's sleep. I woke up one morning, disoriented and out of sorts. My apartment felt different somehow. The same old place I'd been living in for months now seemed foreign to me. I brushed it off, thinking I was just tired from working long hours at my day job in marketing. But as the days went on, strange things kept happening. At first, it was little things. People I didn't remember meeting would say hello to me like we were old friends. One afternoon, I ran into a woman at the grocery store who called me by name, even though I was sure I'd never seen her before. I smiled, said hello, and moved on, thinking maybe I was just too forgetful. But the more I thought about it, the more these little encounters seemed odd. Then there were the dreams. Vivid, bizarre dreams that felt too real. In them, I was trapped in a maze of corridors, and people with blank faces would call my name. But the worst part, I started to wake up with memories that didn't make sense. I'd remember conversations with people I hadn't seen in years, conversations that felt like they happened yesterday. I didn't know how to explain it, but it was like pieces of my life were being shifted around, out of order. It wasn't until I found the folder under my desk at work that I started to really panic. The company I worked for had recently implemented a new policy about mental wellness for employees. I thought nothing of it at first. Everyone at work was talking about how the company had brought in a new wellness program. We all had to sign these forms about neurological health and agree to a series of seminars that promised to help us optimize our mental capacities. I didn't think it was a big deal, just another corporate initiative, right? But one day, I came across a folder tucked under a stack of papers in the corner of my desk. It wasn't something I'd seen before, and no one else seemed to know about it. Inside were pages and pages of reports, each detailing experiments on mind control. At first, I thought it was some sort of joke or a misguided marketing strategy. But the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't a corporate wellness program at all. It was something else, something much darker. The documents detailed a secret government initiative, testing out a mind manipulation program. They had been using it on regular people like me, employees who had agreed to the mental wellness program. There were reports about how certain participants showed changes in behavior, subtle shifts in their thoughts, and even alterations in their perceptions of reality. Some of the reports hinted that certain subjects were selected based on their willingness to conform, their need for approval, or their position in the corporate structure. As I read more, I realized that I had unknowingly become part of the experiment. Every day, I was being subtly influenced. I couldn't remember when it started, but I knew this wasn't something I could ignore anymore. I began connecting the dots, the strange encounters, the dreams, the odd things people would say to me that I couldn't quite place. All of it was linked to something bigger, something that I had unknowingly become a part of. I had to know the truth. I couldn't just keep going through the motions anymore, pretending everything was normal. I began to dig deeper, searching for any information I could find that might explain what was really happening. But every time I got close to uncovering something, the walls seemed to close in. The more I discovered, the more I realized just how powerful the forces behind this program were. I wasn't just being manipulated. I was part of a much larger conspiracy, one that had been controlling lives, shaping decisions, and altering reality for who knows how long. I knew I had to act fast. The truth was slipping through my fingers, and every time I tried to reach for it, something or someone was always there to stop me. But I couldn't back down. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that I wasn't just a victim in this situation. I had a role to play in exposing it. I couldn't let the truth die with me. After that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the folder. The more I looked at it, the more I realized there was something important I was missing. It was as if the pieces of a puzzle were right in front of me, but I couldn't figure out how they fit together. I kept my discoveries to myself, too afraid of what would happen if I shared what I was starting to suspect. I was terrified that I might be imagining it all, paranoid, overworked, maybe even cracking under the pressure. But one night, while I was sitting at my desk at home, trying to make sense of the papers, something clicked. I was scrolling through the documents again when one phrase stood out. Euro recalibration process. My heart skipped a beat. I had seen that phrase somewhere before. It was in one of the wellness seminars I'd attended just a few weeks earlier. The speaker had mentioned the benefits of recalibrating the mind for optimal performance. I had dismissed it as corporate buzzwords, but now it felt like a warning. I started digging into that specific term. I found nothing in public sources, but I did find a name, Dr. Gregory Miles. He was listed as a lead researcher in the program, but his public profile didn't match up with the secrecy surrounding him. His credentials seemed fabricated, and there were no photos, no press, nothing that could point to who he really was. Just a name, with no trace of his whereabouts. I knew then that I was on the right path, but something about this felt different. I wasn't just looking into a corporate cover-up anymore. This was something far more dangerous. The next day, I went to work feeling more unsettled than usual. But as soon as I walked through the doors, I felt it, an eerie sense of being watched. The office felt colder, more sterile. I chalked it up to my nerves, but as I walked past the break room, I overheard a conversation between two senior executives. They were discussing a new intervention program they were rolling out for the employees. I froze. The words they used sent chills down my spine. "She's starting to question things," one of them said. "We need to keep her on track. Make sure she doesn't dig any deeper." My stomach dropped. They knew. I quickly walked back to my desk and shut my laptop. I needed to act fast. They were onto me now, and I had no idea who I could trust. I thought about the chat room I had visited a few days ago, the one where other people had shared their stories of strange experiences and odd memories. I decided I needed to dig deeper into that. I couldn't risk going to the police, and I certainly couldn't ask anyone at work. Whoever was behind this wasn't just going to let me walk away with the truth. I logged back into the chat room, my heart pounding. I posted a message, asking if anyone had heard of Dr. Gregory Miles and the term Euro recalibration process. To my surprise, the response came almost immediately. Someone replied, "It's bigger than you think. But be careful. They're always watching." I felt a rush of adrenaline. Whoever this was, they knew something. They had to. I didn't waste any time. I followed up with another message, asking how to get more information. This time, the reply came with a single link to a hidden website. I hesitated before clicking. What was I getting myself into? But I knew I couldn't stop now. I had already crossed the line, and the truth was just within reach. I clicked on the link. The website was like nothing I had ever seen. There were files, articles, and images detailing the program in disturbing detail. I scrolled through the documents, absorbing every word. The neurorecalibration process was not just about influencing thoughts. It was about erasing memories, rewriting the past, and controlling not just the way people think, but how they experience reality. But what really shook me was what I found next, a video of a test subject, someone who looked remarkably like me. In the video, the person was undergoing the recalibration process. As I watched, I realized the person wasn't just being manipulated, they were changed. Their memories, their reality, were completely rewritten. The person on the screen was a stranger. And then it hit me. I wasn't just part of an experiment, I was living in one. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my memories, my reality, it was all a lie. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew I had to get out. The truth was too dangerous to ignore, and now, there was no turning back. The more I uncovered, the closer I got to the truth, and the more dangerous things became. After that last discovery, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The fact that I had been part of something this huge, this controlling, it made me sick to my stomach. I thought about going to the authorities, but I quickly realized that would be the worst mistake I could make. Whoever was behind this had eyes everywhere. They'd already shown me that much. I started to feel paranoid. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, I felt like someone was watching me. At work, the usual friendly greetings from coworkers now felt loaded with meaning, like everyone was in on something that I didn't know. I noticed a couple of people in the office who seemed to look at me a little too closely. They never said anything, but their glances made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the people I worked with. I got a strange call one night, a man with a cold, calm voice on the other end of the line. "You've been asking the wrong questions," he said. "You're digging into things you don't understand." I tried to respond, but the line went dead before I could speak. I knew right then that I was in over my head. Then came the message. A simple text, but it sent a jolt of fear through me. It read, "We know what you found. We can't let you expose this. Turn back now, or it will be too late." I didn't recognize the number. It could have been anyone. But I knew one thing, the people behind the program were watching me. I realized I had to move quickly. I couldn't stay in one place for too long. I started to dig deeper into the people connected to the project. That's when I came across a name I didn't expect: Dr. James Archer. He was listed as a senior figure in the government faction running the mind control program. But there was something strange about him. He was supposed to be a scientist, a genius in his field, but there were no public interviews, no media coverage, nothing. Just a few mentions here and there in research papers, all pointing to his involvement in shadowy government projects. I couldn't let it go. I spent days tracking down any information I could find about Dr. Archer. I discovered that he had been involved in classified military operations, and it was rumored that he had once worked for a covert government agency known as the Directorate, an organization that didn't even officially exist. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Dr. Archer wasn't just a scientist. He was part of something much larger, something far more powerful than I had anticipated. I needed answers, but there was no one I could trust. I decided to take a risk. I found an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, who worked for a government contractor. He had always been a little secretive, and I had no idea where his loyalty lay, but I had to try. I met him at a local bar, away from prying eyes, and sat down across from him. "Do you know anything about Dr. James Archer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He froze, his eyes darting around the room before locking onto mine. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Archer's not just some scientist. He's a high-ranking member of the Directorate, and they're the ones controlling everything. The program you've been investigating? It's only a small part of what they're doing." My heart raced as I listened. The Directorate was the hidden hand behind everything, the people pulling the strings from the shadows. It wasn't just a group of government officials. It was an underground network, controlling not just thoughts, but entire events, making sure they could influence everything from elections to wars. They had the power to rewrite history itself. "The Directorate's ultimate goal is to control reality, to bend it to their will," he continued. "And you're just one of many people they've manipulated. You've been part of this project for years, but now you're asking the wrong questions. That's why you're in danger." His words hit me like a freight train. Reality itself? The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. I had no idea how deep this went, but it was bigger than I ever imagined. And the worst part? I didn't know who I could trust anymore. Just as I was processing everything he told me, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A man, standing at the far end of the bar, was watching us. His gaze was intense, unwavering. The man's presence felt too deliberate, too calculated. I felt my pulse quicken, and I knew he wasn't just some passerby. He was one of them. Before I could react, my colleague stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You need to leave." "No," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "They know you're here." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my things, paid the tab, and hurried out the door. As I stepped into the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The street lights flickered above me, casting long shadows, and I heard the distinct sound of footsteps behind me. But I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I had no idea how close I was to the edge until I felt myself slipping. Everything I had uncovered so far pointed toward one undeniable truth: the Directorate wasn't just manipulating thoughts. They were manipulating the world itself. And they weren't just some rogue group hidden in the corners of government. They had connections everywhere. They were embedded within every layer of society, pulling strings and keeping secrets I didn't even have the words for yet. I couldn't go back to my old life. The apartment, my job, everything felt like it was a part of the lie now. I had to disappear, at least for a while, but how could I? I didn't know who to trust anymore. The more I tried to dig into Dr. Archer's past, the more I felt like I was sinking into quicksand. The deeper I went, the harder it became to keep my footing. I kept thinking about the video I had found, The one that showed someone who looked like me undergoing the neural recalibration process. That video had haunted me, gnawing at the back of my mind. Was it really me? Or was it just another fabricated memory? I wasn't sure anymore, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed answers. I couldn't keep running in circles. It was time to find out what had really happened to me. I couldn't do it alone. I know that now. I reached out to a former government agent I had met during my brief time working with a tech consulting firm. His name was Samuel Hayes. He had retired early, and his reason for leaving the agency was always a bit murky, but I remembered him mentioning something once about getting out before they turn you into a puppet. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me think he might know something useful. We met at a small, quiet cafe in a part of town I didn't recognize. Hayes looked different than I remembered, more worn, more jaded. The years had taken a toll on him, but his eyes still had that sharp, calculating edge. I showed him the documents I'd gathered, the ones detailing the neural recalibration process and the mind control experiments. He didn't flinch when I showed him the files. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and took a long, measured breath. "This is bigger than you think," he said, his voice low. "But you're not wrong. The Directorate has been running this program for years. They've perfected it, control not just thoughts, but perceptions. People don't even know they're being manipulated anymore. They've rewired society so that it runs on their terms." His words sent a chill down my spine. I had always thought that the world was crazy, that the chaos we saw on the news was just a product of random events. But what Hayes was saying made sense. Maybe it wasn't all just coincidence. "They use people like you, people with potential," Hayes continued. "They give you just enough to make you feel special, to make you think you're in control. But all along, they've been pulling the strings." I had to stop him there. "But why? Why me? Why are they doing this to me and everyone else?" Hayes paused. "Because you're part of the test. They experiment on people they can control, then they let the technology evolve. It's not just about individual control, it's about creating a network of compliant, optimized individuals who fit into their vision of a perfect world. But it's not a world we'd want to live in." I sat there stunned. I didn't want to believe it, but everything he said rang true. It was all coming together in a way I couldn't ignore. "I've seen the consequences of this firsthand," Hayes went on. "The people who resist, who wake up to what's happening, well, they don't last long. They either break or disappear. You can't fight them unless you understand exactly what you're dealing with. But even then," he stopped himself, shaking his head. "You're already in too deep." I didn't want to hear it, but I knew he was right. I was already in it, and there was no turning back now. But the idea of just giving up to them? That wasn't an option. I wasn't going to let them rewrite my life, no matter what it took. I pressed him for more. "How do I stop them? What can we do?" Hayes' face tightened. He glanced around the cafe nervously, then leaned forward. "There's an underground network of people who've been fighting this. I don't know much about them, but I know they've been trying to expose the Directorate for years. If you're serious about this, you'll need to find them. But be careful. The Directorate is always watching. You don't know who your allies really are until it's too late." I left the cafe with more questions than answers, but something had changed. Hayes had given me a piece of the puzzle, but it was just a small piece. The real battle was ahead of me, and now, more than ever, I understood how dangerous it was going to be. I couldn't stop. I couldn't go back. I had to find the people who could help me, and I had to expose the truth. But the deeper I went, the more I realized how much was at stake, not just for me, but for everyone. The days after my meeting with Hayes felt like I was living in a fog. I couldn't shake the realization that I had been trapped in a web of manipulation, and now, I was trying to cut through it. Hayes had pointed me in the direction of the underground network, people who had been fighting the Directorate for years. But finding them was no easy task. The closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The Directorate had eyes everywhere, and I knew the longer I searched, the more likely I was to be caught. I started small. I went through more of the files I'd taken from work, looking for anything that could give me a lead. It felt like every time I thought I was getting somewhere, the walls would close in. I kept hearing Hayes' words echo in my mind. "You're in too deep." But I couldn't back out now. I needed to know what had happened to me and to everyone else who had unknowingly been part of this experiment. Then I found it, the breakthrough I'd been searching for. I was going through an old archive of government papers when I stumbled upon a document with the title, Project Persis, Euro Recalibration and the Future of Cognitive Control. It was buried deep in the records, hidden behind layers of redacted pages and classified stamps. I almost missed it. But there, at the bottom of the file, was a list of research projects. And one name stood out. The Quantum Realignment Device. I didn't understand it at first, but the more I read, the more I realized the implications. The Quantum Realignment Device wasn't just a mind control tool. It was something far more powerful. It had the ability to manipulate not only thoughts but also the very fabric of reality itself. The technology could alter perceptions, create false memories, and, according to the document, change the outcome of events in the real world. I felt my pulse quicken as I read on. This wasn't just about controlling what people thought. It was about creating a new reality, one where the Directorate could dictate the world as they saw fit. The device was capable of rewiring not just the mind, but everything connected to it: how we see the world, how we experience it, how we even remember things. The technology was already in use. It was being tested on people like me, people who had been recalibrated, without even knowing it. I was one of them. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My memories, my experiences, they might not be mine at all. The document contained a series of test subjects, people who had been exposed to the quantum realignment device. The results were terrifying. Subjects who underwent the recalibration had their entire perceptions of reality altered. Some were shown false histories, and their memories were overwritten with fabricated experiences. Some didn't even know who they were anymore. They had become completely different people, controlled by the device. I kept reading, my hands trembling. This was it. This was what the Directorate had been hiding. But there was more. The document hinted at a catastrophic side effect. The more a subject was exposed to the technology, the harder it became to separate the false reality from the real one. The line between what was true and what was manipulated became blurred until the subject could no longer tell the difference. I wasn't just a victim of mind control. I had been living in a fabricated reality for who knows how long. Every memory, every decision, every thought, it could have been manipulated. And now, I could feel it. It was like the walls of my life were crumbling. Nothing felt real anymore. I needed to get out of there. I needed to get somewhere safe and think. But as I was about to leave the apartment, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hall. My heart skipped a beat. They were here. I grabbed the documents and shoved them into my bag. I didn't have much time. I could hear the sound of the door handle turning. Panic rose in my chest as I realized the full weight of what was happening. They were coming for me. I dashed out of the apartment, my mind racing. I didn't know where I was going or who I could trust anymore, but one thing was clear: I had uncovered something too dangerous to ignore. The Directorate wasn't just controlling minds, they were rewriting the world. And I was in the middle of it. The chase had started. I could feel the Directorate's presence closing in on me, and with every passing hour, I could sense the walls around me tightening. The once safe corners of my life, my apartment, my daily routine, had become treacherous. I wasn't just trying to find the truth anymore. I was now in a race against time to expose something so massive, so dangerous, that even the people I'd thought I could trust could be working for the other side. I moved quickly, traveling under the radar. I switched out my phone, using burner devices to stay in touch with the underground network Hayes had told me about. The more I communicated with them, the more I realized just how deep this conspiracy went. The people involved in this fight weren't just individuals. They were scattered across the globe, operating in the shadows, constantly running from the Directorate's reach. They didn't trust easily, and they had every reason not to. But I couldn't back out now. I'd already seen too much, and I was too far down this rabbit hole to stop. My next move was to track down Dr. James Archer, the man who seemed to be at the center of everything. But there was a problem. Every trail I followed led me to dead ends. His name kept showing up in various reports, but there was no clear record of where he had gone, what he was doing, or who he was working with. It was as if he had erased his existence from every system that could be accessed. I knew I had to get closer, but how could I find someone who was already gone? One evening, I managed to meet with a hacker, a young woman named Zoe who was part of the underground network. She had access to government databases and had been working on tracking down key figures involved in the Directorate's operations. Zoe was sharp and quick, and her mind worked like a maze of complex algorithms. She could get into places I never could, but there was a catch. The deeper we went, the more dangerous it became. We couldn't just search for Dr. Archer. We were digging into a system that had eyes everywhere. As Zoe worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just searching for a man anymore. We were looking for the nerve center of the whole operation. We were looking for the heart of the Directorate itself. I felt the weight of it. Every piece of information I uncovered felt like another thread pulling me further into something I could no longer control. Then it happened. We found a lead. Zoe had cracked into a secondary government system, one that wasn't as heavily protected. It wasn't the main database, but it was enough to give us the edge we needed. Hidden within the data was a record of Dr. Archer's last known location, a private medical research facility in the middle of nowhere. The place was isolated, far off the grid, surrounded by high-security fences and armed guards. But if he was there, this could be the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. I didn't hesitate. I had no other choice but to go there, even though I knew the risks. If Dr. Archer was there, if we could get answers, this could be the key to everything. But as I started making my way there, the messages began. The first one was simple. You're being watched. Then the next. Stop now. You'll regret it. I ignored them. I couldn't stop now. I had to push forward. By the time I reached the outskirts of the facility, I could see the security perimeter looming in the distance. The isolation of the place sent an eerie chill down my spine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was out of my depth. I'd crossed too many lines, and there was no going back. As I approached the gate, a dark SUV pulled up next to me, blocking the road. I froze. Two men in dark suits got out, their faces expressionless. "Clara Stone?" one of them asked, his voice cold. "You've been asking too many questions." I tried to take a step back, but the men were already moving toward me. The doors to the SUV were open, and I could see the glint of a gun on the passenger seat. I had no choice. I turned and ran. The chase was on again. But this time, I wasn't just running from them. I was running toward the truth. Whatever was in that facility, whatever Dr. Archer was hiding, I needed to find it. Because the moment I stopped, the Directorate would make sure I never saw the light of day again. I didn't know how long I had been running. Minutes? Hours? It felt like the chase had stretched on for eternity. My mind raced through every possible escape route, every hidden door, but I was losing ground fast. I could hear the footsteps behind me, closing in with every step I took. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but there was no time to stop. I had to keep moving. I finally reached the facility's edge, where the high fences met a dense patch of trees. I didn't think twice. I scaled the fence, the metal cutting into my palms as I pulled myself over. I landed on the other side with a thud, barely managing to stay upright. But I didn't have time to check for injuries. The facility was just ahead, and I knew I was close. I slipped through a gap in the perimeter, staying low to the ground. The air was thick with tension, the only sounds coming from my shallow breaths and the occasional rustle of the leaves underfoot. I had no idea where I was going, but I had a single objective: find Dr. Archer, find the truth, and expose the directorate. The building loomed in front of me, stark and clinical, its windows dark and imposing. It was a place of secrets, a place where people's lives had been altered without their knowledge or consent. I could almost feel the weight of those lives, their memories manipulated, their realities rewritten. I didn't hesitate. I moved toward the entrance, where a side door stood slightly ajar. It wasn't locked, almost as if they were expecting me. My heart raced as I pushed it open, stepping into the dimly lit hallway beyond. Inside, the walls were bare, the air musty with the scent of old technology and sterile equipment. It was eerily quiet, the only noise the faint hum of machines and the distant sound of doors creaking open and shut. I knew they were watching, but I couldn't back down now. I had come too far. I crept down the hall, avoiding the security cameras, taking sharp turns whenever I heard footsteps. Every corner seemed to bring me closer to the heart of the operation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always just a step behind me. Then I found it. A door at the end of the hallway, marked with a simple label: Research. I didn't think twice. I pushed the door open, slipping inside. The room was filled with rows of monitors, each displaying endless streams of data. But it wasn't the data that caught my eye. It was the large screen in the center of the room. On it, a live feed played, showing a man sitting in a chair, his eyes wide and unblinking. Dr. James Archer. The image of him sent a jolt of recognition through me. He was the one I had been searching for, the one who held the answers. But as I watched, my stomach dropped. The screen flickered, revealing something even more chilling: the man wasn't alone. In the corner of the room, a team of scientists stood, adjusting monitors and making notes. The man in the chair wasn't a test subject, he was me. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I leaned in closer, my eyes glued to the screen. The man, me, was undergoing the same neural recalibration process that I had found in the files. I could see the electrodes attached to his head, the sterile equipment buzzing around him. They were rewiring his mind, manipulating his memories, altering his reality. It wasn't just that they had been controlling us, they had been replacing us. I staggered back from the screen, my mind reeling. The truth was too much to process, but there it was, clear as day. The directorate wasn't just controlling our thoughts. They were erasing our identities, swapping us out with new versions of ourselves. The person on that screen wasn't just another victim of the program. He had been created to replace someone else, someone like me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had uncovered something much bigger than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about mind control. It was about rewriting people's very existences, erasing everything they had ever known, and turning them into something else entirely. Before I could gather my thoughts, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside the door. I knew they were coming for me. I had to get out of there. I grabbed the files from the desk, shoving them into my bag. As I turned to run, I caught a glimpse of Dr. Archer on the monitor. His face was calm, almost too calm, as if he knew exactly what was happening. But there was something else in his eyes, something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. The door swung open, and I froze. Standing in the doorway was a man, tall and imposing, dressed in a dark suit. His eyes were cold, but there was a hint of recognition there. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "You were never meant to know the truth." I turned to run, but the man was faster. He grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "It's over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "The Directorate always wins." But I wasn't going to let him win. Not now. Not after everything I had discovered. I twisted out of his grip, grabbing the nearest object I could find, a metal chair, and swung it at him with all my strength. He staggered back, momentarily stunned, and I took the opportunity to escape. I ran as fast as I could, the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't know where I was going or how long I had before they caught up to me, but I knew one thing: I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever. I thought I had seen the worst of it. But I hadn't. The more I uncovered, the deeper I sank into this nightmare. The escape from the facility had been close, but it was only the beginning of a far greater struggle. The Directorate wasn't just a rogue agency running an illegal program. They were a machine, a well-oiled system of control that stretched across borders, infiltrating every aspect of life. I didn't know how long I had before they came for me again, but I couldn't afford to stop now. The files I'd stolen from the research facility were a treasure trove of information, and I wasn't going to let them go to waste. But as I sifted through the documents, I realized something worse than I had feared. The true scope of the Directorate's plan was even more terrifying than I could have imagined. They weren't just manipulating individuals. They were manipulating the course of history itself. The files detailed several covert operations that had been carried out over the years, operations that had altered the outcomes of major events in the world: elections, military conflicts, economic collapses, even natural disasters. It was like they had been controlling the world's narrative, shaping the future to fit their vision of power. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to find out how deep this went, and how much of the world's history had been rewritten. But there was something more. As I continued to study the documents, I found something even more unsettling: an outline of the quantum realignment device. It wasn't just a tool for mind control or perception alteration. It was a tool for reshaping reality itself. The files described experiments where entire cities were affected by the device, changing the way people thought, lived, and even remembered their pasts. It wasn't just about controlling individual thoughts. It was about controlling collective memory, changing how societies functioned at their core. As I read, I realized the true horror of it. The Directorate wasn't just creating a world of compliant, controlled individuals. They were creating a world where reality could be tailored to fit their needs. They had the power to rewrite history, to change the world's very fabric. It wasn't just an experiment. It was a full-scale operation to change the course of humanity. And I had been a part of it, unknowingly helping them shape this new reality. But how could I expose something this vast, this entrenched? How could I fight an enemy that controlled everything? Information, history, even the memories of everyone around me. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help, but I didn't know who I could trust. The underground network was still my only lead, but the more I reached out to them, the more I realized how much danger I was putting them in by even communicating with them. The Directorate had eyes everywhere. Anyone who got close to me was a target. I reached out to Hayes again. I needed to know what to do next. We arranged to meet in a hidden location, a small diner on the outskirts of the city where we wouldn't be noticed. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth at the back, his face obscured by a newspaper. "Clara," he said, looking up as I slid into the seat opposite him. "You're digging too deep. You're going to get yourself killed." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Not when everything I had learned was pressing down on me. "I know what they're doing, Hayes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know about the quantum realignment device. I know they've been controlling history, shaping the world. They've been manipulating reality itself." His expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. "You don't know the half of it. The Directorate has been running this for decades. And now you're in the middle of it. You've seen how they control minds, how they control people. But it goes beyond that. The real power is in the device itself. And whoever controls that controls everything. I leaned in desperate. Then we have to stop them. How do we take it down? Hayes looked around, checking to make sure no one was listening. The only way to stop them is to expose everything. You have to find the main facility, the one that controls the device, and you have to destroy it. But be careful. They won't let you anywhere near it without a fight. I nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. I had been running for so long, but now I had a purpose. The Directorate wasn't just a shadowy organization pulling the strings behind the scenes. They were the architects of a new reality, and I wasn't going to let them win. But as I stood up to leave, Hayes grabbed my arm, stopping me. Clara, you have to be ready for what you're about to uncover. It's not just about stopping them, it's about understanding what they've done to everyone, what they've done to you. You've been living in their reality for so long, you won't know what's real anymore. Be prepared to lose everything. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I didn't care. I was going to stop them. I had to. I left the diner with more resolve than I'd had in weeks. The pieces were coming together now. The Directorate had altered everything, our memories, our lives, our history. But I wasn't going to let them continue this. Not while I still had a chance to make things right. I knew the battle ahead would be the hardest one yet. But I wasn't going to let fear stop me. I wasn't going to let them rewrite the world any longer. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. Every step I took forward felt like it was leading me deeper into a labyrinth, and every time I thought I was getting close to the truth, more walls seemed to close in. But I wasn't about to stop now. I had come too far, seen too much to back down. The Directorate had spent decades building this twisted reality, and I wasn't going to let it continue. I had the files, I had the evidence, but I needed more. I needed to get to the heart of the operation, the place where it all began. The main facility that controlled the quantum realignment device. The facility where they shaped the world itself. It wasn't just a building, it was the nerve center of their operations, and it was heavily guarded. I started to make my way there, using every bit of knowledge I had gained over the past few weeks. I had to find the coordinates, trace the movements, and figure out a way inside. The underground network had helped me as much as they could, but even they were wary of getting too close. The Directorate had a reputation for silencing anyone who got in their way, and I couldn't risk putting them in danger any longer. I reached out to Hayes again. This time, we met at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, one of the few places I could trust. He had managed to track down some satellite images of the facility, and we spent hours looking over them, trying to pinpoint the most vulnerable entry point. But it wasn't just the physical barriers that worried me, it was the psychological ones. I had learned more about the neural recalibration process in the last few weeks than I had ever wanted to know. It wasn't just a way to control people's thoughts. It was a way to make them forget who they were, to make them believe whatever the Directorate wanted them to. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep this conspiracy ran. There were people out there who had no idea they were being controlled, living in a world that wasn't even real. I wasn't sure how to feel about it anymore. Had my memories been altered too? Was my reality just another fabrication? The more I uncovered, the more I realized how little I actually knew about myself. "You're doing the right thing," Hayes said, breaking my train of thought. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. "This is the only way. You have to destroy the device, or they'll keep rewriting everything. They'll keep controlling the world." I nodded, though a part of me wasn't so sure. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. If I failed, it wouldn't just be my life that was destroyed. It would be the lives of everyone caught in the web the Directorate had spun. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. I was no longer just fighting for survival. I was fighting for the truth, for the future of reality itself. But as I looked at the map on the table, something caught my eye. It was a small detail, almost insignificant, but it stood out to me. A mark on the edge of the facility, hidden behind a series of smaller buildings. "That's it," I said, pointing at the spot. "That's the entry point." Hayes squinted at the map. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "There's no other way. It's the only spot that doesn't have heavy security. We can get in there, but it'll be tight." He stared at the map for a few more seconds before standing up. "Then we move tonight." I felt a surge of adrenaline. The moment had arrived. There was no more waiting, no more planning. The truth was in there, and I was going to find it. We didn't waste time. Hayes had already arranged for a set of fake IDs and a small arsenal of tools to help us get in. The plan was simple: get in, find the quantum realignment device, and destroy it. But as we geared up and made our way out of the warehouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was it. This was the last step in a journey that had already cost me so much. The drive to the facility was quiet, too quiet. Every turn felt like we were getting closer to something I couldn't fully comprehend. The weight of everything that had happened, every memory, every step of the investigation, felt like it was hanging over me. When we reached the facility, the night seemed to stretch on forever. The guards were posted at every corner, but the entry point was clear. We moved quickly, slipping past the outer fence and into the shadows. Hayes led the way, his movements precise, calculated. But as we neared the entrance, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a faint light in the distance. Too many people gathered outside the facility. It wasn't just the usual night patrol. Something else was happening. My heart raced. The directorate had been waiting for us. "This isn't just a mission," I whispered to Hayes. "This is a trap." Before he could respond, we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. And then voices. They were closing in on us. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding in my chest as the footsteps grew closer. Hayes didn't say a word, but I could see the tension in his eyes. We were running out of time. The trap had been set, and we had walked right into it. I thought about all the sacrifices, all the pieces of the puzzle that had finally come together, and the overwhelming feeling that this was it. This was the moment where everything would either fall apart or change forever. The guards were nearly upon us, and I knew we had only one shot. I turned to Hayes, my voice barely a whisper. "We can't let them win." Hayes nodded. "Get to the device. I'll cover you." Before I could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the shadows as I made my way toward the facility's core. I had no idea what I was going to find inside, but I knew one thing: I couldn't let them manipulate the world any longer. The device had to be destroyed, or the directorate would keep rewriting reality, reshaping history until there was nothing left but their version of the truth. I reached the entrance to the central building, my pulse racing. The door was unlocked, almost too easy. I pushed it open and slipped inside, careful to stay out of sight. The hallway was eerily quiet, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. This place was designed to trap people like me, people who sought the truth. The deeper I went into the facility, the more the walls seemed to close in. The halls twisted and turned, and every room felt like it held a secret. It was like being trapped in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. Then I found it. The door was locked, but I had been expecting it. I quickly used the tools Hayes had provided and bypassed the security system. Inside was a large, sterile room, and in the center of it all, sitting on a pedestal, was the quantum realignment device. I stepped forward, my hands shaking as I approached it. The machine was far more advanced than I could have ever imagined. It pulsed with a strange energy, and I could feel its power radiating from it. This was it. The heart of the directorate's operation. The source of their control. But before I could do anything, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Dr. Archer. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice cold and detached. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I had seen enough. I had learned enough. He wasn't going to stop me. I stepped closer to the device, my hands trembling as I reached for the control panel. Dr. Archer's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something, fear. "You have no idea what you're doing," he repeated, his voice more frantic now. "You'll destroy everything. You'll destroy yourself." But it was too late. I knew what I had to do. I slammed my hand down on the device's control panel, and the world seemed to shudder around me. The machine hummed, its lights flashing wildly as it powered up. I could feel the air growing thick, heavy with the energy of it. And then, there was a flash of light. For a moment, I couldn't see. I couldn't hear. It was as if time itself had stopped. But when my vision cleared, everything had changed. The machine was dead. The room was silent. Dr. Archer was gone. I stood there, breathing heavily, my body shaking with adrenaline. I wasn't sure what had happened, but I knew one thing: the device was no longer working. The Directorate had no power over me anymore. But as I left the facility, I knew the fight wasn't over. The damage had been done, and the world I had known was gone. What I had just destroyed wasn't just a machine, it was the heart of the Directorate's control over reality. Without it, things could change. People's memories could be restored. History could be rewritten. The truth could finally come to light. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that whatever it was, it would be up to us. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a chance. I walked away from the facility, the weight of everything still heavy on my shoulders. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing: I had just given it back to the people. And for the first time, I felt free.